Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. The first time I stepped into the guard shack, it still smelled faintly of stale coffee and dust. It sat just inside the old loading gate on the south side of the factory complex. A concrete box with a flat roof, reinforced glass in 3 directions, and a steel door facing the lane where trucks used to pull in. The factory itself stretched out behind it across several acres of rusted machinery, empty loading docks, and long brick buildings with broken windows. This used to be the Willow Avenue Industrial Park on the east side of Cleveland, Ohio. Before the outbreak, I came through here a few times as an electrician to work on conveyor motors and lighting panels. After the outbreak, it turned into one of those places people avoided because the sight lines were bad and sounds echoed in strange ways. The day I chose that shack as my safe zone, the sky was overcast and the wind pushed dead leaves along the truck lanes. It was late afternoon, sometime after 4 p.m., but the light was already low between the buildings. I had spent the last week sleeping in the stairwell of an office tower near downtown, but too many people had the same idea. The last night there, I heard 3 different groups arguing in the parking lot below about canned food, and I listened to infected answering their voices from the next block. I needed somewhere smaller, quieter, and easier to control. My name is Daniel Hart. Before this all started, I worked maintenance for a mid-sized electrical contractor. We took service calls for warehouses, small plants, and strip malls from Lakewood to Euclid. I knew how to read panel schedules, pull wire, mount conduit, and troubleshoot faulty circuits. I knew how most commercial buildings hid their weaknesses, the things that mattered if you had to defend yourself or stay invisible. When the virus hit and people started collapsing in grocery store aisles and then getting up again in ways they were not supposed to, those skills turned out to be more useful than my degree or my old resume. I saw the guard shack 3 days before I actually moved in. I was cutting through the industrial area to avoid a group of infected clustering on Woodland Avenue. They had formed a loose ring around a disabled bus, drawn there by a car alarm someone had set off and then abandoned. I slipped between the lots, staying near the back fences, watching the way infected responded to distant noise. They were not fast in open ground. Most just wandered until sound or movement made them turn. But in places where the sound bounced around off metal and brick, they moved with more purpose. From a distance, the factory complex looked dead. No lights in any windows, no new vehicle tracks in the gravel. The main gate along Willow Avenue hung partly open, its chain cut sometime earlier. The guard shack at the gate sat dark. It had that cheap, temporary look. A prefab concrete cube with big windows and faded safety posters taped to the glass. But even from across the street I could see the metal frames around the windows and the thickness of the glass panels. Reinforced. Not enough to stop a truck, but enough to stop someone swinging a pipe. I crossed the street at a slow walk, scanning the windows of the nearest building for movement. Nothing. A torn banner on the fence still carried the company name, Horizon Components Precision Metal Fabrication. I remembered the logo from invoices I had filed in my old office. I moved through the open gate, staying near the guard shack wall in case anything came through the yard. The steel door had a deadbolt with the key still in it, hanging on a little plastic tag. Whoever left had done it in a hurry. I pushed the door in slowly. The hinges creaked once, then settled. A waist-high counter ran along one wall with the computer monitor turned off, keyboard pushed aside, drawer hanging open with pens spilled. 2 filing cabinets, a narrow locker, a folding chair, and an old mini-fridge hummed quietly in the corner. A window unit air conditioner sat dead in one opening. Fluorescent tubes overhead hung in a yellowed plastic fixture. I stepped inside, closed the door, and stood still. It felt solid. That was the first important thing. The floor was concrete, not rotted wood. The walls were real poured concrete with a smooth finish, not thin panels. The windows were layered glass with metal mesh embedded in them. I tapped one with my knuckle and heard a dull sound. I grabbed the steel door handle and pulled. It closed with weight. The deadbolt turned with a clean, tight motion. I checked the ceiling. The roof was a flat slab of concrete, judging by the edge visible through the window. There was no attic crawl space, no obvious way in from above unless someone cut through. I inspected the frame around the door. No cracks, no big gaps. The electrical conduit came in through a rigid metal pipe near the floor, then ran up into a small panel box behind the desk. That meant power from somewhere inside the factory, which I might be able to tap. I stood there for several more minutes, listening to the muted sound of wind between buildings. No footsteps, no shuffling, no voices. This was better than a stairwell. I left without touching much, just to make sure no one saw me going in and out. That first visit was reconnaissance. I walked the perimeter of the factory yard, keeping near stacked pallets and parked trailers. I counted entry points. There was the main gate in front of the guard shack, a side gate farther down with a chain still looped through the bars, and a narrow pedestrian gate near the rail spur in the back. Fences were 8 feet high, chain link topped with barbed wire. Some sections had slumped where tree branches leaned against them, but they still formed a barrier that would slow infected. Inside the yard, the factory buildings formed canyons. Long brick walls with high windows broken in patches. Steel doors spaced every 30 or 40 feet, many locked, some hanging open. Shipping docks with concrete ramps and rusted dock levelers. Forklifts sat dead in a row near the far wall, forks tilted down, paint faded. It was the kind of place that got busy at shift change and then emptied. Now it was a hollow shell. I saw 2 infected that first day. One wandered near the back fence, moving with that uneven walk, head turning whenever the wind clanged a loose piece of sheet metal. The other stood near a loading dock, swaying slightly, eyes toward the ground as if listening. I stayed behind a row of stacked crates, counting how long it took them to respond when a distant siren echoed faintly from somewhere deeper in the city. They both slowly turned their heads in that direction and began to drift that way, drawn to the noise. They were not smart in the usual sense, but they oriented very quickly to sound. That night, I went back to the office tower, but I could not stop thinking about the guard shack. It was small, almost cramped, but that was a benefit. Less space to secure, less space to heat. Fewer surfaces where someone could hide inside with me, and the way it sat at the gate, slightly offset from the main lane, meant I could look out in 3 directions and see anyone approaching before they reached me. The next day I moved in. I went just after sunrise, when infected activity seemed lowest. Maybe it was only my perception, but the hours around dawn felt quieter. I had a backpack with my essentials. A compact sleeping bag, a spare pair of socks, a small first aid kit, a headlamp, water filter, and all the canned food I had left. I carried a 12-inch pry bar in one hand and a used 9mm pistol tucked under my hoodie at my lower back. It was a Glock 19 I had taken from an empty police cruiser on day 4 of the outbreak. The cruiser had been wrapped around a traffic light pole on Superior Avenue. Driver's side door open, no one inside. The pistol had been in the holster between the seats with a spare magazine in the center console. I had fired it only twice since then, and both times I regretted the noise it made. I did 2 loops around the factory again before stepping through the gate. No people, no infected in immediate sight. I went straight to the shack, unlocked the door with the key still hanging there, and slipped inside. The first thing I did was close the blinds. There were horizontal blinds inside each window, dusty and stiff. I pulled them down and tilted them so I could still see through the slats if I stepped close, but anyone outside would see only a soft outline. That changed the feel of the room immediately. I was no longer sitting in a glass box on display. I set my bag on the floor and started stripping the place. The old computer went first. I unplugged everything and put the monitor and tower on the floor. I slid them under the counter out of the way. The filing cabinets were light, mostly filled with outdated gate logs and visitor forms. I removed the drawers, carried them to the corner, and stacked them. That gave me an open stretch of floor where I could unroll my sleeping bag. The mini-fridge hummed quietly but kicked on and off every few minutes. That would be a problem. The compressor made a distinctive sound that might carry at night. I unplugged it and left the door open to keep it from smelling worse. Next, I looked at the panels. The electrical conduit entering the shack fed into a small breaker panel with 4 circuits. One for the lights, one for the outlets, one for the air conditioner, and one for the gate motor that no longer worked. The main breaker was still up. I flipped one of the light switches. The fluorescent tubes overhead flickered twice and then came on weakly. Some power still flowed from somewhere in the factory. That was both good and complicated. Power meant I could charge batteries, run a small fan, and plug in my radio. It also meant I had to assume someone else might still be drawing from the same source or could flip things on without me knowing. I decided I would use power, but only on my terms. I shut off all breakers except the one feeding a single outlet near the desk. I unscrewed the fluorescent tubes and set them on top of the locker, then screwed in a single LED bulb in a clip-on lamp I carried. That way, if someone flipped the switches outside, the shack would not suddenly light up in the middle of the night. I could control my own light with a switch on the lamp. The walls inside had a thin layer of paneling over the concrete. Some panels were loose at the bottom. I pulled them back and checked for cracks or openings. I found a small gap where a conduit entered and sealed it with duct tape and a scrap of plastic from a broken storage bin. Nothing could squeeze through, but it made me feel better. Then I went outside and began working on the windows. The reinforced glass was strong, but I wanted something more substantial between me and anyone with a heavy tool. I walked the yard and found what I was looking for near one of the loading docks. A pile of rusted rebar and steel angle pieces, leftovers from some dismantled project. I carried them piece by piece back to the shack, keeping my head up and ears open. The sound of metal against metal made me nervous, but the factory grounds stayed quiet except for wind. I used the rebar to build simple cages over the outside of each window. I drilled holes into the concrete with a battery-powered rotary hammer I had salvaged weeks earlier and still had a few charges left for, then anchored lengths of rebar vertically and horizontally, wiring them together with steel wire. It took most of the day, and my hands shook from fatigue by late afternoon, but when I stepped back, the shack looked less fragile. Someone would now need tools, time, and a lot of noise to get through those windows. The small space forced me to be selective with what I kept. That was an advantage. I had room for a sleeping area, a small shelf for food and water, and a clear space near the windows where I could sit and observe. Nothing extra. If I ever needed to abandon the shack, I could be out with my pack in under a minute. That became one of my rules. Never let the base become so cluttered that escape turned into a project. I stayed inside that night, lying on the floor in my sleeping bag with my back against the wall under the windows. I kept the lamp off and used the faint glow from the city reflecting off low clouds to see. Through the blinds, I watched shadows shift over cracked pavement and weeds. Around 10 p.m., the infected started to move. You can tell the difference between human footsteps and theirs. Normal footsteps have rhythm and intention. Infected feet scuff, drag, and sometimes stumble. They move like they are learning to walk over and over. I heard that sound on the pavement outside, moving in uneven patterns. Sometimes it came close to the shack, then drifted away. Once, a hand thumped against the glass near my head. I did not breathe for several seconds. The shadow lingered, fingers tracing the rebar, then it moved on toward the open lane. I learned something important that first night. The guard shack sat in a slight acoustic shadow. The way the buildings rose behind it and the gate structures stood in front meant that noises inside the factory bounced around before reaching the shack. I could hear distant echoes of infected vocalizing, sharp sounds of metal falling, and even an occasional shout from somewhere far off. But they arrived softened, and when I spoke inside the shack at a low volume, the sound did not carry far beyond the walls. The concrete absorbed most of it. That was when I started to think of the shack as a forgotten pocket in the middle of a collapsing city, a small neutral zone between all the bad decisions happening beyond the fences. The next morning, I started mapping. If I was going to stay here, I needed to understand how sound moved through the factory grounds and where the blind spots were. I took a yellow legal pad from the guard's desk and drew a rough map of the lot. The gate, the shack, the main building, secondary structures, loading docks, rail spur, and fence lines. Then I walked the yard in a slow circuit, stopping at each corner and landmark to listen. Whenever I heard infected, I marked their positions and what had drawn them. Sometimes it was a distant siren from downtown. Sometimes a metal door swinging loose in the wind. Once it was the sound of someone firing a gun several blocks away. Each time, infected turned toward the source, forming loose groups only when a new noise reinforced their attention. They did not coordinate in any clever way, but their numbers and their tendency to drift toward echo points made certain routes dangerous. I found a safer path across the yard, a zigzag line that kept me close to stacked pallets, concrete barriers, and raised loading docks where I could quickly climb out of reach. There were catwalks inside some parts of the factory that connected overhead. I noted which doors led to those stairwells. If I needed to reach the far side of the complex, high ground would be better than weaving between machines at ground level. Every few days, scavenger groups passed through. I saw the first group on my second afternoon there. I was sitting on a crate inside the shack with the blinds tilted open a fraction, watching the gate. Around 2 p.m., 3 people slipped through the opening between the broken chain and the side post. 2 men and 1 woman, all carrying backpacks and some kind of blunt tools. One had a cut-down steel pipe, another had a short crowbar. They moved with the cautious confidence of people who had done this before. They checked the first 2 trailers in the lot, pulling open doors, pausing to listen before climbing in. They spent longer near the parked forklifts, stripping wiring from the controls and pulling out copper bus straps from a half-open transformer cabinet. They were after metal and anything that could be sold to someone with a generator and a working scrapyard off the grid, assuming such a place existed anymore. Eventually, they moved toward the main building, trying doors, listening, and vanishing into the shadows of a side entrance. None of them came near the guard shack. From the outside, it still looked like it had been stripped months before. The blinds were closed. No obvious light, no sign of life. The desk and chairs inside were barely visible. It was just another dead structure on the edge of a dead factory. As the hours passed and more scavengers came and went over the next week, I saw the same pattern. They moved between machinery yards and loading docks, focused on the obvious storage areas. They checked trucks, tool sheds, and main doors. Almost nobody looked twice at the guard shack unless they needed a quick bit of shade. The longer I stayed hidden there, the more it felt like a small island inside a storm. Of course, feeling safe and actually being secure are different things. The guard shack solved some problems: shelter, basic visibility, physical protection, but it did not solve water or food. Those required movement outside. Water came first. I had about 4 liters in bottles when I arrived. That was enough for a couple of days if I rationed. I knew I could not count on the municipal supply. Pressure had been low the last time I opened a faucet downtown, and the flow was full of sediment. I needed my own system. The shack's flat concrete roof helped. On my 3rd day there, I climbed up using a rusted stepladder I found near the dock. The roof was maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, edged by a short lip. I cleared leaves and trash, then dragged up 2 plastic pallets and some sheets of corrugated metal from the yard. With some old screws, zip ties, and 2x4s I scavenged from a broken crate, I built a makeshift rain catchment surface sloped toward a corner. I positioned a food-grade plastic barrel just below and cut a hole in the lid to accept a downspout made from a length of gutter I pulled off the warehouse. It took work and about 6 trips up and down the ladder, but the result was functional. When it rained, water would hit the metal, sheet down to the gutter, and empty into the barrel. I installed a fine mesh screen at the inlet to keep leaves and insects out, then ran a short hose through a hole I drilled in the wall so I could fill containers from inside without exposing myself on the roof. The first light rain filled the barrel halfway. I filtered every gallon through a hollow fiber squeeze filter before drinking. It tasted slightly dusty, but it was clean enough. Food was tougher. There was no pantry sitting untouched inside the factory. Any vending machines left would have been smashed by early scavengers. I needed to get creative. On the 4th day, I took a risk and crossed the back fence into a strip of smaller brick buildings lining Quincy Avenue. Before the world fell apart, they had been small shops and offices: a print shop, a small auto repair garage, a corner convenience store. Most of the glass fronts were shattered. Their interiors had already been looted for obvious items, but sometimes things remained in back rooms and storage areas because people moved quickly. I used a side alley to approach the convenience store. The front windows were gone, but the metal roll-down security shutter over the entrance had jammed halfway. Someone had forced it up enough to crawl under. I paused, listened, and then slid inside head first, pistol out. The air smelled stale. Shelves were overturned. Cardboard boxes were ripped open across the floor. The coolers lined along one wall were dark and empty. I checked behind the counter and found nothing but torn lottery tickets and a tipped cash drawer. Only when I searched the back storage room did I find anything worthwhile. A box of unsold canned soup pushed behind a stack of cleaning supplies, and 6 packs of instant noodles in a plastic tub. I took it all, stuffing cans into my pack and tying the noodles by their plastic around the straps. On my way back to the shack, I moved slower. I kept one ear tuned to the shifting echoes between the buildings. Twice, I had to freeze and wait as infected drifted down the cross street, drawn by some noise in the distance. When I finally slid back under the factory fence and closed the shack door behind me, the familiar weight of the steel felt better than air conditioning. Days started to form a pattern. Mornings were for quiet repairs and improvements inside the shack, or for short scouting runs within the factory grounds. Midday, when the light was strong and infected seemed to wander more, I stayed inside watching. Late afternoon to early evening, I did longer trips if necessary, checking abandoned offices inside the factory, climbing to catwalks to get a better view of the surrounding neighborhood, or carefully moving to nearby blocks to search for supplies. Nights were for listening, resting, and sometimes thinking too much. It was during one of those quiet mid-mornings, about 10 days after I moved into the shack, that I picked up the first clear human voice over the handheld radio. So, I had found the radio in a shipping office inside the main factory building. It was a small black handheld, the kind sold under dozens of brand names, with a cracked plastic belt clip and "Charge Nightly" written on a label on the back. There was a charger base on the desk, plugged into a surge strip. I took both back to the shack and plugged the charger into my one live outlet. The next morning, the radio powered on with a short beep, battery indicator showing full. Most of what I heard at first on the programmed channel was static. Occasionally, a distant burst of someone's voice would cut through, too clipped to understand. I tried scanning the range and found a few stronger signals. Short-range walkie-talkie chatter from scavenger crews, someone using a similar device near the riverfront, a couple repeating the same call sign over and over with no response. It was chaotic, uncoordinated, and mostly useless. Then, one late morning, a stronger voice came through, repeated twice. All stations, this is Lakeshore Point. Broadcasting on open frequency 19. We have secure shelter, water, and basic medical support near the Collinwood rail yard. Priority for families and unaccompanied minors. Grid power independent. If you can hear this and can travel, move toward Lakeshore Boulevard and east 152nd. Marked signals every half mile. Do not approach if followed by large numbers of infected. Message repeats. The voice clicked off. After a short pause, the same message repeated with only slight variations. Calm, steady, not frantic. Someone had rehearsed it. I knew the area they were talking about. The Collinwood rail yard sat several miles northeast along the lake. It was a maze of tracks, switching equipment, and maintenance buildings. I had driven past it countless times on my way to jobs. There were warehouses nearby, rail maintenance depots, and a lot of industrial land that would have been abandoned quickly when the outbreak hit. It was the kind of place that could be turned into a contained shelter if someone organized it right. The idea of leaving the shack and making that trip stirred something in my chest. Hope, maybe. Also dread. Between me and Collinwood lay miles of neighborhoods, open intersections, and clusters of infected. I had just found a place I could control. Walking out into the unknown because of a voice on the radio felt like stepping away from a solid, known safety net. I decided on a compromise. The shack would remain my primary safe zone, but I would start planning routes in that direction in case circumstances forced me to move. I added a new section to my rough map, this time extending beyond the factory fences. I marked approximate positions of main roads, railroad lines, and possible choke points. If I ever had to leave, I wanted at least a starting plan. The shack itself continued to evolve. Over the next 2 weeks, I turned it from a bare concrete box into something that worked more like a small command post. I scavenged a few more battery-powered devices. An old security camera DVR from the main office, a set of dome cameras from the warehouse ceiling, and a bundle of coaxial cable. Most of the cameras were broken or facing useless directions, but 3 still worked. I mounted those 3 cameras on the outer corners of the shack roof, pointing them toward the main gate, the factory interior, and the side lane, then ran the cables through an existing conduit penetration. Inside, I set the DVR on the counter, plugged it into my outlet, and patched everything in. When the hard drive spun up and the screen showed 3 grainy views of the yard, I felt an unfamiliar surge of control. I could sit inside with the blinds closed and still see what moved outside without exposing my silhouette. Power was still limited, so I did not leave the system running all day. I kept it off during bright sunlight and only powered it up every hour or 2 for a quick scan, and during the evenings when visibility mattered more. I learned how to read the movement on those screens the way I had learned to read panel schematics. A shifting shadow on the north camera meant the door to the main building had caught the wind again. A blur near the gate usually meant a stray infected wandering through. A cluster of distinct shapes moved with purpose, and a certain caution meant scavengers. It was the cameras that showed me Carla before I ever heard her voice. It was around 5:30 p.m. on a gray day with low clouds and a soft drizzle that never quite turned into real rain. I had just powered up the DVR to do a quick scan when motion flickered on camera 1, facing the gate. At first, I thought it was another small group of scavengers. 3 figures came through the gap at the gate, 1 stumbling, 2 moving quickly. Then I saw the way one of the leading figures kept glancing back over her shoulder, and the way the third figure's arms hung straight down while its head tilted unnaturally toward the sound of their footfalls. I turned up the audio feed, but all I got was static hiss. The cameras did not carry sound. The 2 leading figures cut left instead of following the main lane. They headed directly toward the stacked pallets near the fence. The trailing figure, clearly infected now, lurched after them, gaining slowly. On the monitor, I watched the woman's short dark hair, gray hoodie, jeans, small backpack grab the arm of the man with her and push him toward the fence. They argued for half a second, then he boosted her up. She swung a leg over the drooping top where the barbed wire had sagged. The infected closed the distance. The man tried to follow, but his foot slipped on the wet chain link. He hit the ground hard. By the time he tried to scramble up again, the infected was on him. I could not hear, but I saw the struggle in the flailing limbs. The woman on the fence froze. She looked back once, then dropped to the other side and vanished from the camera frame. The infected remained where the man had fallen, moving in a way I did not want to describe in detail even to myself. After a few seconds, another infected appeared from off-screen, drawn by whatever small noises traveled over the wet concrete. Then another. I shut off the screen for a moment, turned away, and held my breath until my pulse stopped pounding in my ears. When I turned it back on, the scene had changed. The cluster of infected had moved slightly toward the worker trailers on the far side of the yard, drawn onward by some other stimulus. The man no longer moved. The woman was nowhere in sight. Then I saw motion along camera 3, the one covering the side lane. She was moving along the outer fence, keeping low, staying near a row of shipping containers. She had made a wide arc to get away from the commotion at the gate and was now looking for an exit. The problem was, there was no easy way out along that stretch. The fence ran unbroken for hundreds of feet, ending only at the rear corner near the rail spur. If she kept going that way, she would eventually run into more infected that tended to gather near the tracks. If she tried to cross back through the yard, she risked meeting the others drifting in from the gate. She did not know about the shack. I stood there indecisively for several seconds, one hand resting on the back of the chair. My rules had been simple until now: stay invisible, avoid contact, do not draw attention. That was how I had survived this long. Any noise or movement that broke the pattern could bring everything down. Helping her would mean opening the door, calling out, and possibly drawing infected through the gate who might otherwise pass by. I looked at the monitor again. She paused near a broken trailer, looking between the fence and the interior. Her shoulders sagged once, then straightened. She adjusted her backpack and started inward, toward the factory, toward more danger. That was the moment my decision shifted. I grabbed the handheld radio, switched it to transmit, and picked the output jack of the old intercom system mounted on the wall. I had been tinkering with it the day before, tracing where the wires went. One set led to a speaker mounted under the overhang at the main gate. The old system had been designed so the guard could call out to trucks without opening the door. It still worked if you gave it power and fed it a signal. I flipped on the intercom breaker, keyed the radio, and spoke into it. "Hey, gray hoodie by the containers, stop. Stay where you are, don't run." My voice came out of the shack radio and also out of the crackling speaker at the gate. On the monitor, I saw her freeze. She spun madly, searching for the source. Her eyes went toward the main building first, then toward the lane. Finally, she looked up at the gate structure and saw the speaker. "Look toward the small concrete shack by the gate," I said, trying to keep my tone calm and level. "Rebar on the windows. I see you on cameras. Do not shout. Do not run. Walk slowly toward the shack. If infected appear, climb onto the nearest truck or trailer. Do you understand?" She stared at the gate for a second, then gave a single sharp nod that the camera barely captured. "Good. Walk along the inside of the fence toward the gate. Stay close to cover. If you see any infected, stop and wait for me to tell you where they are." We repeated that pattern for the next 2 minutes. I used the cameras to guide her around the edge of the yard, avoiding the lines of sight where I had seen infected wander. Twice she had to freeze while one of them drifted nearby, its head turning slowly as it listened to faint noises on the wind. She stood perfectly still each time, weight balanced, ready to bolt for the nearest raised platform. But they turned away, pulled by some other sound further inside the complex. When she finally reached the strip of concrete maybe 20 feet from the shack door, I shut off the intercom, stepped away from the monitor, and moved to the door. I kept the pistol low at my side, pointed toward the floor. I opened the deadbolt and cracked the door 2 inches. She was there, soaked from the drizzle, breathing hard, eyes wide. She looked younger up close than she had on camera, maybe 26 or 27. There was a thin scar along her left eyebrow. Her gray hoodie was smeared with dirt where she had climbed fences. "Inside. Now," I said quietly. She slipped through the gap, and I shut the door behind her, turning the bolt with a solid click. For a long moment, we just stood there in the dim light of the single lamp, listening. No running footsteps outside, no sudden shouts, only the hiss of the drizzle on concrete and the faint hum of the DVR's hard drive. "Thank you," she said finally, voice hoarse. "I thought I was done." "You almost were," I said. "Sit down before you fall down." She sat on the metal chair by the wall, hands still shaking. I poured her a cup of filtered rainwater from a jug and handed it over. She drank, then winced as if her throat hurt. "My name is Carla," she said after a moment, still catching her breath. "Carla James." "Daniel," I said. "You can call me Dan. This is my place." "I figured," she said, looking around the stripped interior, the rebar cages visible through the blinds, the cables running along the walls. "You're not exactly subtle." "Subtle enough that no one has checked this shack in weeks," I said. "Until you." "I wasn't checking it," she said quickly. "I was just trying to... anywhere with a door." Her mouth tightened. We were cutting through from the south. My friend Tyler thought the lot would be quicker. We heard something. He pushed me toward the fence, and then... She trailed off, staring at the floor. "You don't need to finish that sentence," I said. I saw most of it on camera. Her fingers tightened around the cup. "Is it just you?" she asked. "Here, I mean." "Just me," I said. "For now." "For now," she repeated quietly, then gave a small, tired smile. "I didn't mean to invade your safe spot. If you want me to move on once it's dark, I will. I just needed not to be out there for a minute." Her eyes flicked toward the door. I had spent weeks constructing a routine that kept me alive by prioritizing my own needs and minimizing risk. Letting someone else in changed every variable. More noise, more consumption of water and food, more chance of a disagreement at the wrong time. But as I looked at her exhausted posture and the way her hands still shook from adrenaline, it was impossible to treat this like a formula. "Tonight you stay," I said. "We'll talk about later in the morning, but there are rules." She nodded immediately. Yeah, of course." First rule, no shouting in here, no loud arguments, no banging on walls. Sound travels weird between these buildings. Infected respond to sudden noise very quickly. I've watched it happen. Second rule, nothing accumulates in front of the door or under the windows. If we have to move fast, there can't be obstacles. Third rule, if I say get down, you get down. No questions in that moment. We can discuss after. The same goes for if you say it and I hear something I missed. Fair? Fair, she said. I'm good at being quiet. She gave a short, humorless laugh that turned into a cough. Fourth rule, I added. You pull your weight. That means scouting, carrying supplies, standing watch. I've been running this operation alone. If there are two of us, we both work. That's more than fair, she said. I was working in a place like this before all this. Different company, down by the river. I know how to move around machinery yards. I know what rooms people overlook, and I can keep watch. I'm not a tourist. Good, I said. Then we might make this work. She drank the rest of the water and set the cup carefully on the shelf. Can I ask something? She said after a moment. Go ahead. How did you talk to me through the gate speaker? I don't see any microphone. I pointed at the handheld radio on the desk and the tangle of wires leading to the wall. Old intercom system, I said. Guard pressed to talk. I jury-rigged it so I can feed audio from the radio into the amplifier. It's not elegant, but it lets me project my voice without sticking my head out in the open. I only use it when I have to. Last thing I need is for every scavenger in earshot to know someone still lives in the guard shack. She nodded, impressed despite everything. You're an electrician or something? She asked. Maintenance electrician, I said. Before. You? Assembly line at a parts plant off St. Clair, she said. Stamping and packaging truck brackets. Fun stuff. Then you know how factories sound when they're alive, I said. She looked toward the window where rain streaked the glass behind the rebar. Yeah, she said softly. This is worse. It's like a ghost shift that never starts. She stayed. We never formally agreed on it. The conversation about in the morning never turned into an eviction notice. By the time the sky lightened the next day, we had shared enough information, talked through enough plans, and recognized enough common sense in each other's thinking that sending her back out alone felt stupid and cruel. She knew routes on the south side I had not explored yet. She had a good eye for movement in the yard, catching subtle shifts on the cameras that I sometimes missed. And she understood the importance of staying quiet without needing reminders. We adjusted the interior of the shack to accommodate two people. That meant even more discipline about what stayed and what went. The second folding chair was now in use. We turned one of the stacked filing cabinet drawers into her storage box, labeled with a piece of tape so we could keep track of what belonged to whom. We shared food and water evenly, keeping a handwritten log on the wall to avoid arguments. Simple, clear records diffused tension before it began. The biggest adjustment was watch schedule. Before Carla, I slept in irregular blocks, waking whenever the city outside grew too loud or too quiet. Now, we set a schedule. From about 9 p.m. to 1 a.m., Carla watched the monitors and listened at the windows while I slept. From 1 a.m. to sunrise, I took over while she rested. During the day, one of us was always within arm's reach of the door when the other left the shack. It did not take long before we faced our first serious test of that system. It came from other living humans, not infected. 2 weeks after Carla arrived, a scavenger crew finally noticed the guard shack was more than an abandoned box. It had been a hot day, one of those late summer afternoons that still held on to their heat even after the sun dipped behind the buildings. The factory yard felt like an oven. Waves of warmth rose off the asphalt between the loading docks. We had both done short runs in the morning and then holed up inside, dozing and watching the monitors in shifts. Around 4 p.m., 3 men came through the gate. I recognized 2 of them from previous drive-by visits. They were part of a regular crew that worked the industrial belt, stripping copper and anything else of value. They had voices I had heard over the radio, arguing about where to go next and who owed whom their cut. The third man was new, taller, with a shaved head and a red bandana around his wrist. Each carried a pack and some kind of tool. One had a heavy sledgehammer. On the monitor, I watched them follow their usual pattern at first. They checked trailers, disassembled a small transformer cabinet, and pried open a door to a maintenance shed. Then, instead of heading deeper into the complex, they stopped near the shack. The man with the bandana pointed at the rebar over the windows and said something I could not hear. Another shrugged and laughed. They walked around the shack, scanning the walls, tapping the rebar with their tools. "They know someone is using this place," Carla murmured, leaning close to the monitor. "That rebar wasn't there before. They're not blind." "Maybe they think it was the last guard," I said. "Someone long gone." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe they're wondering if there's a stockpile in here." On camera, the man with the sledgehammer came to a stop directly in front of the door. He raised the hammer and rested it on his shoulder. He knocked once with his fist, then tilted his head as if listening. I motioned to Carla, and we both dropped lower inside the shack, out of direct line with the windows. The blinds were already tilted down. From outside, they would show only vague shadows if we moved too much near them. There was a long silence. The man knocked again, harder, then rapped the steel with the hammerhead. The sound reverberated through the small space, a heavy metallic drumbeat that made the hairs on my arms rise. "Maybe it's empty," one of the others said. I heard the muffled words through the door rather than through the monitor. "We could use it as a base." "Rebar on the windows, man," the bandana guy replied. "Somebody put in work. Nobody does that just to bail." "Could be dead inside," the third voice said. "Could be full of canned food." "They're not walking away," Carla whispered. No, they were not. I could hear the calculation in their voices. In a world where resources were limited and safe spaces rare, an unclaimed structure like this was too tempting to ignore. They might decide to smash their way in just to be sure. If they started beating on the door with a sledgehammer, they would make enough noise to draw every infected within several blocks. The shack would probably survive the assault. The concrete and steel could take a lot. But if the door frame warped or the lock failed, we would have to flee through a yard filling with infected, while 3 angry scavengers tried to grab whatever they could. That scenario ended badly in most directions. "We need to steer them away," I said quietly. "How?" Carla asked. I glanced at the intercom panel, then shook my head. Using it here would be worse. It would confirm to them that someone was inside and reveal the line from shack to gate. "Infected," I said. "We use them." I moved to the DVR and quickly scrubbed backward through the last few minutes of footage, muting the current feed. I looked for any sign of infected movement in the wider yard. It took only a few seconds to find them. A loose cluster of 3 dragging themselves along the back fence, moving toward the main building's side door. "They're near the far loading dock," I said. "If we can create a noise there, they'll go that way instead of wandering toward us." "How do we make noise back there without leaving?" Carla asked. I pointed to a panel map I had taped to the wall showing the main building's electrical distribution, sketched from memory and observation. "There's a fire alarm pull station tied into a horn and strobe near the side dock," I said. "I wired a temporary jumper yesterday from the shack's live circuit to that branch on the main panel. I was planning to test it later. If I close that switch now, it should trigger the horn. "You built a remote noisemaker?" she said, half amused despite the tension. "More like a remote distraction," I said. "I just wasn't planning to use it this soon." Outside, the man with the hammer banged the door again. "I'm going to throw the breaker," I said. "When the horn sounds, those scavengers will hear it too. They might decide whatever is making that noise is more interesting than this silent box." "And the infected?" Carla asked. "They'll go there first," I said. "We stay silent, and the scavengers either go investigate or get nervous and leave. Either way, they're not smashing our door." She thought for exactly 1 beat, then nodded. "Do it," she said. I moved to the small panel behind the desk. The temporary jumper I had installed ran from the live breaker feeding my outlet to a second breaker tied into the main building's fire alarm loop. I flipped that second breaker up. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, from somewhere in the depths of the factory, a sharp, pulsing horn began to sound. Short blasts about once per second. The kind of alarm that would have signaled a test or emergency back when people still cared about such things. On the DVR, I unmuted the live feed. Through camera 3, I watched the infected near the far dock react almost immediately. They straightened slightly, heads tilting up. They turned toward the sound and began drifting in that direction. The horn echoed between the metal walls and brick, bouncing around until it seemed to come from everywhere. Outside our door, the scavengers paused. "What the hell is that?" one of them said. "Alarm," another replied, "back in the main building." "It means there's power in there," the bandana man said. I could hear the greed in his voice even through the muffling effect of the door. "Where there's power, there's stuff. Generators, batteries, maybe lights. This little box can wait." He knocked on the door one last time with his fist. "If anyone's inside, you picked a good hiding spot," he called. "We're not your problem today. But if this place is still standing next time we come through, we're going to check again. Friendly at first. Less friendly if we have to be." Then their footsteps receded toward the main building. On the monitors, I watched them move down the lane, heads turning toward the source of the horn. I also watched the infected converge on that general area, drawn by the constant pulse. The pressure in my chest did not ease until the scavengers reached the side door and disappeared inside, taking their risk with them. I let the alarm run for another 40 seconds, long enough to pull the infected cluster away from the gate, then flipped the breaker back down. The horn cut off abruptly. Echoes faded. "You're playing chess with the whole yard," Carla said quietly. "Trying to," I said. "Pieces move where sound tells them to go. If we can influence that without exposing ourselves, we stay alive longer." "What about when those 3 come back?" she sassed. "He said they would." "We'll be ready," I said. "More distractions, maybe a fake sign, maybe we won't be here when they return." She looked at me sharply. "You thinking about Lakeshore Point?" she asked. I had told her about the radio broadcast. Now, having seen her nearly die in front of the cameras and watched scavengers threaten our door, the idea of a larger, better defended community felt less like a rumor and more like an option. "I'm thinking about exit strategies," I said. "A small safe zone in the middle of a city full of infected and desperate people has a shelf life. The shack is secure now, but security is a moving target. We have limited water, limited food, and limited ways to expand. We can't farm here, we can't collect fuel easily, we can't build more permanent defenses without drawing attention. Eventually, something will go wrong that we can't outthink." She considered this, jaw clenched. "So we use this place as a launch pad," she said slowly. "A stepping stone." "Exactly," I said. "We plan from here. We gather enough supplies for a serious move. We scout routes in daylight from catwalks and rooftops. And when we go on our terms. Not because a crowd of infected is ripping at the rebar or some crew with guns decides this shack should be theirs." The next days confirmed that timetable. The scavenger crew did not return immediately, but infected activity increased slightly around the factory. The alarm I had triggered created a memory that seemed to echo in their behavior. Even after the horn stopped, they drifted through the yard more often, as if they expected interesting noises here now. They responded faster to sounds from the surrounding streets. The neutral pocket of quiet around the shack shrank by a few degrees. In response, we tightened our noise discipline even more. No cooking smells. We ate most canned food cold. No unnecessary movement after dark. No testing of new systems without a clear plan and an escape route. At the same time, we began preparing for departure. We made a list on the wall under a piece of cardboard labeled "Go Bag." It included essentials: water filters, compact food, first aid supplies, radio, backup batteries, multi-tool, spare clothing, fire-starting gear, maps, and a small amount of trade goods. We packed 2 sturdy backpacks and weighed them to make sure we could carry them for miles if needed. We also needed transport. Walking all the way to Collinwood was possible but dangerous. Moving slowly through infected streets with heavy packs left too much to chance. A vehicle would help, but most cars in the area either sat with their hoods open and batteries gone or were blocked in by abandoned traffic. Then, one afternoon, we found a workable answer. We were exploring the far lot near the back fence, following a side lane we had not thoroughly checked before. At the end of that lane, partially shielded by an overgrown tree, sat an old white pickup truck. It was an extended cab Chevy, paint faded, company logo ghosted on the doors. The driver's side window was intact. The tires were low but not flat. A layer of dust coated the hood. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. Inside, the seat covers were torn. The keys were in the ignition. I looked under the hood. The battery was still in place. Terminals were slightly corroded, but the cables were connected. The coolant reservoir had fluid. There was oil on the dipstick, not clean but not sludge. The gas gauge inside showed just under a quarter tank. "You think it'll still start?" Carla asked, standing watch with her pry bar at the ready. "Only one way to find out," I said. "But not right now. Starting it will announce us to every infected listening within 1,000 feet. We test it when we're closer to actually leaving. For now, we prep it." We checked the bed. It contained a plastic toolbox with rusted wrenches, a couple of bungee cords, and a ratchet strap. Useful enough. We wiped off the windows so we could see into and out of it easily. Then we slipped away, leaving it appearing as untouched as possible from a distance. Back at the shack, we added truck to our exit plan list. If the engine turned over when we were ready, it would give us a hard shell to push through the first few miles. If it did not, we would fall back to the walking route. The factory guard shack, once a final destination, had become a forward operating base. On our last week there, the city reminded us why we had never intended to stay forever. It started with a storm. Weather had been unstable for days, hot and humid with the rolling clouds that never quite delivered more than a drizzle. Finally, one afternoon, the sky darkened in a way that made my skin prickle. The clouds turned a deep slate gray over Lake Erie and moved inland. The air grew still. Then a wind gusted suddenly through the factory yard, sending loose papers and leaves spiraling. We sealed the shack as best we could. Carla double-checked the rebar straps on the windows. I ensured the rain catchment system was secure and the barrel lids were tight. Then we settled in to watch. Rain hit first. Heavy drops pounded the metal catchment sheets and drummed on the roof. The sound was loud enough to mask almost everything else. Lightning flashed, followed by deep, rolling thunder. The city's already fragile power grid flickered, then died. The small lamp inside the shack dimmed and went out as the main panel lost input. Our one outlet went dead. The camera system shut down. We switched to battery-powered lanterns and flashlights, careful to angle them toward the ceiling and keep them low. The storm raged outside, turning the yard into a shimmering blur behind the blinds. The infected did not like heavy rain. We had observed that much. They moved less when visibility dropped. They tended to cluster under overhangs and inside doorways. That should have worked in our favor. But storms did something else. They changed the soundscape. Every thunderclap was a hammer blow to their senses. Every wind gust sent sheet metal banging, branches scraping, and unsecured objects rolling. The usual patterns we relied on to track movement in the yard turned into a chaotic mess. Then the lightning struck something on sight. The flash was so bright that it burned through the blinds, thin gaps and edges of it danced across our vision. The bang came half a second later. A sharp, cracking explosion, followed by a deeper rumbling. The shack vibrated down to the concrete floor. The smell of ozone seeped in through the vents. We heard something else under the thunder. A sharp, metallic crunch and a higher-pitched whine. When the aftershocks died down, Carla moved to the smallest gap in the blinds and peered out. "There's smoke," she said. "Near the old transformer yard. I think something blew." I grabbed my jacket and the handheld radio. "I'm going out to take a look," I said. "In this," she said, gesturing at the rain pounding the windows. "Storm means fewer wandering infected between here and there," I said. "If a transformer caught fire and spreads to a cable tray or breaker room, it could burn through parts of the building. If this place goes up, our shack might be safe for a while, but we do not want to be here when everything around us is on fire." She understood. Fire in a world with limited emergency services did not stay controlled for long. "I'll watch the monitors as soon as they come back," she said. "They won't," I said. "Power's out, but keep your ears open. If you hear increased infected noise at the fence, you shout. If something happens to me and I don't return in 10 minutes, you grab the go bag and follow the plan to the truck." Her expression tightened, but she nodded. I opened the shack door a crack and stepped out into the rain. The yard was a sheet of water. Puddles formed in the low spots, reflecting the gray sky. Lightning flashed again in the distance, silhouetting the factory buildings. I kept low, moving from cover to cover, using container rows and stacked pallets as visual breaks. The rain soaked my hoodie and jeans within seconds, but it also masked the sound of my footsteps. The transformer yard sat near the main building's side, where a large gray box and several smaller cabinets had been mounted on a concrete pad to receive power from the grid and distribute it inward. Now, one of those cabinets glowed faintly orange from within, smoke curling out from vents along the top. The metal visibly warped as heat built. I stayed back, behind a row of stacked steel beams, and watched. Rain hammered the smoking cabinet. Steam rose in bursts as water hit hot surfaces. The glow did not intensify. That was some relief. Maybe the internal fire would be contained, burning itself out without jumping to nearby structures. But the smoke was a problem. It rose into the air and drifted on the wind toward the city. Infected did not respond to smoke the way they did to sound, but humans did. I scanned the perimeter as best I could through the rain. That was when I saw the flashlight beams. They came through the gate, bobbing in the rain like erratic fireflies. White light streaked through the downpour, cutting across the yard. Voices followed, raised and careless. "Over here," someone shouted. "I saw that flash come from this direction." It was the scavenger crew again, plus at least 2 more people, drawn to the lightning strike and the possibility of live equipment, salvage, or even fuel. The storm that had given us cover now also pulled others toward our location. I retreated toward the shack, staying in the shadow of the main building. The flashlight beam swept across the yard, catching on the rebar of the windows in a brief flash. I saw one beam pause there for a moment, then move on. Inside, Carla had heard them too. When I slipped through the door and shut it behind me, she already had the pistol in her hand and the lantern turned down low. "They're back," she said. I heard their voices over the rain. "I saw 5 total," I said. "Same 3 as before, plus 2 newcomers. They're heading toward the transformer yard. Fire's contained so far, but that area is going to be a magnet until the rain puts everything out." "We can't use the alarm trick again," she said. "There's no power." "No," I agreed. "But the storm might work in our favor in a different way." "How?" "Any sound we make will blend with thunder and rain," I said. "If we need to move gear to the truck or even start it, now is better than a clear day." Her eyebrows went up. "You're saying we go now?" she asked. "I'm saying the window we planned for is opening," I said. "We have scavengers distracted by a transformer they think might still have value, infected, thrown off by the storm, and enough noise in the air to mask one engine starting. If we wait until tomorrow, that cabinet will be cold. Those scavengers will have had time to search more buildings, and infected will adjust again. The longer we stay, the more information everyone has about this place." She took a slow breath. "Then we move," she said. "We stick to the plan. Bags, radio, essentials. Everything else stays." We packed in less than 5 minutes. The go bags were already prepared. We added the last fresh water we could carry, a few extra cans of food, and the radio with fully charged spare batteries. I took the pistol and spare magazine. Carla took a sturdy backpack and a heavy pry bar she'd grown attached to. We each had a compact knife on our belts. Before we opened the door, I turned in a slow circle inside the shack. The space looked strangely empty without our scattered daily items. The desk was cleared except for the DVR, which sat turned off. The sleeping bags were rolled and gone. The shelf that had held food now held only a few empty cans and a note I had taped up hours earlier, back when the possibility of leaving had first seemed real rather than theoretical. The note said simply, "If you find this place, keep it clean, keep it quiet. Remember that small spaces save lives when big plans fail." It was for no one in particular. Maybe for myself, if I ever ended up here again by some twist of fate. Maybe for someone who stumbled across it after we were gone. Carla followed my gaze to the note and gave a short nod. "Good rule," she said. We stepped out into the storm. The rain hit harder now, almost horizontal in gusts. Lightning flickered behind the clouds. Thunder rolled continuously, a deep backdrop of sound. The scavengers' flashlights still bobbed near the transformer yard. I saw one of them trying to pry open a smaller cabinet with a crowbar, sparks showering briefly as something grounded out. We moved along our practiced route, staying low, hugging the fence line, using trailers and containers as cover. Visibility was reduced to maybe 30 or 40 feet in the heavy rain. That worked along our trip. Anyone looking our way would see only blurred shapes. At the back lot, the white pickup waited under its coatings of wet dust. Carla circled it once, checking for fresh tracks or signs of tampering. Seeing none, she moved to the passenger side and opened the door quietly. I slid into the driver's seat, water dripping on the worn upholstery. I inserted the keys fully. They had been halfway turned during my check days earlier, and took a breath. "When I turn this, we commit," I said. "We already committed when we closed that door," Carla said, glancing back toward the shack barely visible through the rain curtain. "Do it." I turned the key. For a moment, the starter clicked without engaging, a horrible stuttering sound that made my gut clench. Then, on the third attempt, the engine turned over. It coughed twice, then caught with a low rumble that grew steadier as it warmed. The dashboard lights glowed weakly. The fuel gauge still pointed just under a quarter. The sound of the engine was loud in my ears, but outside, the storm and thunder swallowed much of it. From the transformer yard, the scavengers' flashlights did not swing immediately in our direction. "Seatbelt," I said automatically. Carla blinked, then actually laughed once and clicked hers in place. I put the truck in drive and eased it forward. We followed the lane along the back fence toward the small rear service gate near the rail spur. The main gate by the shack was too exposed and too close to the scavengers. The rear gate, once used by maintenance crews, had not been my first choice earlier because the fence there sagged, and the rail lines beyond were crowded with old freight cars. But with the storm cover and the engine running, it offered a better exit away from the current attention. The gate was closed with a rusted chain when we arrived. I stopped, left the engine idling, and jumped out with the bolt cutters I had brought along for this exact moment. The chain resisted at first, then gave with a sharp snap that was swallowed by the rain. I pushed the gate open enough for the truck to squeeze through, then climbed back in and eased us onto the gravel strip beside the tracks. As we cleared the line of buildings, the city opened up around us. To the right, towards downtown, lightning flashed over dark shapes of abandoned warehouses and office blocks. To the left, toward Collinwood and Lakeshore Boulevard, the rail lines stretched under the heavy clouds, illuminated sporadically by lightning. I steered us left. Behind us, the guard shack shrank and disappeared behind the factory mass. It had served its purpose, a small, hardened bubble of safety in a hostile grid. It had given us time to learn, to plan, and to launch this next phase. As we drove along the rail access road, avoiding stalled cars and debris, I kept one eye on the fuel gauge and one on the mirrors. Infected wandered near intersections, turning their heads when the headlights flashed across them. But the storm kept most of them under cover, and the steady engine noise blended with the wind. Carla watched our surroundings, gripping the handle above her window. "Lakeshore Point," she said quietly, almost to herself. "You really think it's there?" "We'll find out," I said. "If it is, we check if they deserve the trust they're asking for. If it's not, we keep doing what we've been doing. Find small pockets, fortify, move when we have to." She looked at me, then back at the road ahead. "You turned an empty guard shack into something that kept you alive for weeks," she said. "Then you kept me alive too. Whatever we find at Lakeshore, I think we'll manage." The wipers squeaked across the windshield, pushing sheets of water aside. The road curved alongside the tracks, heading gradually toward the lake and the distant promise of a rail yard turned into a safe zone. Behind us, in the middle of a collapsing city, a concrete box with rebar on its windows sat in the rain, dark and silent again. From the outside, it looked no different from any other forgotten structure. But to me, it would always be the first proof that even in the worst conditions, a small, well-chosen space, reinforced with care and held with discipline, could become a safe zone. And if I had to, somewhere ahead, in some other abandoned place with steel doors and hidden conduits, I knew I could do it again. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.